The Soul Foundation exists to seriously address one of humanity's biggest questions: unidentified anomalous phenomena. The Soul Forum is a digital platform that extends the critical discussions and research presented at our annual symposium. Welcome to the Soul Forum with our host, Dr. Peter Skafish, cultural anthropologist and co-founder of the Soul Foundation. Dr. Eric W. Davis is a leading expert in advanced aerospace propulsion concepts and applications, with 4 decades of combined aerospace industry and academic experience. Dr. Davis led many advanced research projects for the U.S. government and aerospace industry and was the science advisor to the DoD's classified OSAP, ATIP, and the UAP task force.
Eric, welcome to the Soul Forum. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I want to, just start off by noting, your significance in the public conversation and the conversation in Congress about government UAP secrecy. People have known your name, around since the time of the phenomenon. People who aren't just, UAP enthusiasts, the film The Phenomenon. And they've known you both as a really significant scientific voice on government projects concerning UAP, but also as somebody that investigated government secrecy, both on behalf of the government and also for the National Institute of Discovery Science that was started by Robert Bigelow. So you've been a really, really important voice on figuring out what's going on with UAP secrecy, and also working on the physics of the phenomenon. But now I think your role has increased in the public conversation where you're making some very bold, huge claims in the age of disclosure. Some of them have been out there, some of them haven't. But you and Hal Puthoff are in a sense, in the major supporting roles there, really delivering some, to a lot of people, astonishing claims concerning crashed and recovered UAP, the so-called legacy program, the recovery and reverse engineering program, knowledge of this program and of events that it's had to deal with by U.S. presidents. These are really astonishing claims for people that don't follow this. And to a lot of people, they'll be implausible. Today we want to talk with you about what you know and how you know it, to the extent that you can talk about that, because we know some things are classified. And so I want to start off by asking you, what is ground truth where the U.S. government and UAP is concerned?
The ground truth is there is a there there. The U.S. government has known since at least 1944 the existence of, since during World War II. So during World War II, the existence of anomalous phenomenon in the atmosphere that was interfering with Allied and probably German air operations over their enemy territories. We recall those being called Foo Fighters, and I can't remember. Ghost rockets was the other one. And so since that time, those have never been identified definitively. And then starting in 1944 was the U.S. Army's recovery of a crashed UAP craft that was recovered in Italy. And it was recovered in Italy in 1933 by that government before Hitler and the Third Reich more or less began their major march across Europe and started World War II. And so that was the era when all that began. Everybody keeps thinking in the milieu of U.S. published literature on UFOs and UAP. We always known them as UFO, but by the way, UAP is a very old term too. It was coined back in the 50s. And I think Edward Ruppelt coined UAP, if I'm not mistaken. But I know the 1950s, early 50s is when that terminology first appeared. So anyway, so the published books on crash retrievals really began in the early 1980s with a number of authors, and I'm not going to review all that. Stan Friedman was the most prominent one, and it was all focused on the crash at Corona, New Mexico, on the Foster Ranch that was managed by a ranch manager named Mac Brazel, and of course that was misidentified or mischaracterized or misrepresented as the crash at Roswell or the Roswell crash, when it was no such thing. Corona is quite a distance from Roswell, and roughly, I think, some 30 some miles away. So the crash took place on the Foster Ranch in the Corona area, but it was the 509th Bombardment Group at Roswell Army Airfield that recovered it. And so that's where the press gets this identification issue with the phenomenon occurring in Roswell, or the incident occurring in Roswell when it actually occurred in Corona, New Mexico. So from that point forward, we have this history of publications of these events, and there's not that many of them going forward.
Okay, so just to get to some major aspects of ground truth, you're saying that there's been knowledge of this on the part of the military and the intelligence services since World War II, even pre-CIA.
Yeah,
and,
there is.
And that retrievals, started in the 1940s, even the recovery of someone else's retrieval. And okay, so what happens then in the 1950s and 60s? I mean, one of the questions people have about this is, how in the world could you keep a secret of this magnitude for 80 years? And how is that done?
It's the same level of secrecy that's applied to the nuclear weapons development program. Sure, it was poorly secured because of all of the Soviet spies and the leaking among 2 or 3 members of the Manhattan Project staff in Los Alamos, New Mexico, who were passing information on to Soviet agents. However, what has not been leaked into the public domain are the blueprints on how you build nuclear weapons. It's not just the science involved with the components that go into it. It's an art, because you have the art of how you're going to manufacture those components, which you have to turn into a science, an engineering science, as a matter of fact. So there's an art to a way you, like, for example, we know how to whittle balsa wood or other types of wood. And the technology or the science is the use of a sharp blade or knife and a piece of wood. But the art is what's the best type of wood, and what type of artistic skill the carving guy has in forming some sort of an artistic piece out of the wood that he's whittling there. So so nuclear weapons are comprised of a set of almost lost knowledge, art, and how you machine, fabricate various components and features of the nuclear warhead, and the very mysterious things that went into it that were very surprising and counterintuitive, and they're common everyday objects, actually.
Okay,
and
you're saying all that has been...
Yeah, a lot of that has been well kept. And but as far as military secrets, sure, it got leaked out, but that leaked out by spies to a foreign nation. And it wasn't leaked out into the public domain. We didn't have anybody printing newspaper articles showing the blueprints or the interior features of a nuclear warhead for a long time. And I think it's been roughly within the last 20 years, maybe 30, that there are rough sketches, not detailed, and specifically not detailed, but just rough outline type graphics or sketches of what the internal arrangement of nuclear weapons are what they look like and what there are, with an identification of the key major components, like what the fuel is, where it is, and maybe the shape of something. But you're not getting everything in between all that. You're only getting a very superficial, fuzzy level what's inside a nuclear weapon. So for all intents and purposes, nuclear weapons are still among the most closely held secrets. Biological warfare weapons and antidotes, same thing. A lot of that has not been released in the public domain. And for goodness sakes, even the remote viewing program that was run out of Stanford Research Institute during the Cold War remained classified from its inception in '72 until President Clinton declassified it officially in 1995. So that was a long time. And here we're running decades into this thing with the UAP crash retrieval phenomenon, and it has not been perfectly locked up. It's just that you will always have a vast majority of personnel that have eligibility and need to know access to this information who will keep their mouth shut. And they'll keep their mouth shut until maybe they're on their deathbed, and they'll give an affidavit at a court or to a court officer and have it recorded in perpetuity. And so that's the only time anything comes out about it. And in the case of the crash at Corona, yeah, that's what happened. Like retired Brigadier General Thomas Dubose, who was the former chief of staff of the 8th Army headquartered commander, Brigadier General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth at the 8th, I think it was called Carswell Army Airfield, but it got changed to the 8th Air Force. So anyway, the point is that a lot of these individuals, most of them, didn't talk about Roswell or Corona. And it wasn't until they got very old that they were able to do so. And then during President Clinton's administration, when he had John Podesta go look for, through the cabinet agencies, go look for the classified UAP information. And somewhere in that process, Sheila Widnall, who was the Secretary of the Air Force, issued an order relieving all Roswell 509th Bombardment Group personnel during their duty station or duty assignments in calendar year 1947 to openly talk about what they experienced, what they knew, what they saw about that event in Corona. And what she did is she waived their NDA requirement permanently. She just lifted it and said, hey, guess what? You won't go to jail or get fined $200,000 or both by talking about it. I'm letting you talk about it. And that was at the behest of John Podesta on behalf of President Clinton. So,
Eric, let me intervene for the benefit of people who don't know all the esoterica about Roswell. What are the basic facts as you know them, and how do you know them?
With respect to which?
Well, okay, yes, to Corona, as you said, but I believe there were two vehicles that.
No, there was only one.
There was only one.
Yeah, that's this two vehicle thing seems to be some sort of a rumor that never bore any truth. The fact is that the classified history of it is just one craft. So I know it from interacting with a number of people who had direct access then. So basically, that would be former Apollo 14 astronaut Ed Mitchell, who was a captain in the United States Navy at the time he retired from NASA and the Navy. And there would also be my interactions with Brigadier General Arthur Exon, who was the base commander at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base right around the late 50s, early 60s period, because he had personal firsthand knowledge and interactions with the 509th Bombardment Group's command staff during that period of time. He was on a TDY there for a period of time in roughly August, I think, or September of 1947. And then he had to do another TDY trip from Wright-Patterson to, he was at Wright-Patterson, not as a commander. Like I said, he was there as the base commander, late 50s to early 60s. When he was at Wright-Patterson, I meant he was at Wright Army Airfield before the Air Force was ever born. And so this was Wright Army Airfield, circa 1947, before the National Security Act of 47 was enacted into law the fall of that year, which the Air Force was spun out of it as a separate military service from the Army. So, so let's see, I interviewed him in January and February of 2002, and it was like 7 hours of interviews spread out over just those 2 days. That was recorded and transcribed.
Seven hours of interviews. Wow. Okay. And you were doing that on behalf of the National Institute of Discovery Science at the time.
Yeah,
correct?
that was there. Mm-hmm.
So this was like an official, I mean, you were being paid to investigate this, correct?
Yeah, I was a professional ufologist, one of the very few in the world. The NID staff, composed of myself, Dr. Colin Kelleher, Dr. George Onett, and then one of the quasi-staff, quasi-science advisory board member, Dr. John Alexander, who's a retired Army colonel. So we were on the staff. And then I'm not talking about the support staff or the investigators, that we were the scientific staff. And then we had a world-class science advisory board that consisted of Hal Pitoff and Jacques Vallée and Ed Mitchell, who I mentioned earlier, former Apollo 7, I think it was Apollo 17 geologist, Jack Schmidt, who was a former senator of New Mexico by that time, medical doctors, psychology department heads, provost of a university who is the same psychology department head, Admiral Rickover's chief nuclear engineer, Ted Rockwell, and I think I kind of, and Kit Green, Dr. Christopher C. Green, who at the time was the number 3 man at General Motors. He was the director of the Advanced Technology Center at General Motors and was their director of their Asian operations. And so we had a pretty good group of people. I didn't cover them all. Yes, 2 more individuals who were fellows of Los Alamos National Labs, very prominent physicist. So it's a great organization. I think we had 17 members of the board at one time, but just very few. I think maybe 2 or 3 or 4 never really came to the meetings all that much, except rarely.
Okay,
rarely
so you had an extraordinary group of people.
Okay, so let me move on. So after NIDS is the Air Force Research Lab. So after my job is over at NIDS at the end of April of 2002, well, actually before then, it was arranged that I would begin as a contract principal investigator to the Advanced Concepts Office at AFRL's Physical Sciences Lab at Edwards Air Force Base. So I worked for the program manager there, and that started in beginning of January 2002. So when I lost my job at NIDS at the end of April 2002, I was already employed, and it was basically outside work that I turned into day-to-day work, and that lasted for a number of years. And so the program manager
and this job also puts you in contact with people from which you learned.
The program manager had me into all this same stuff because he had worked at that laboratory when it was originally known as the Air Force Phillips Rocket Propulsion Lab, and he started there in the early mid 60s thereabouts, and he didn't retire until 2009, I believe, is when he retired. So he was there a very long time. He came into contact with a great many people. And during that era of his tenure there, we had Wright-Patterson Air Force Base under that name. So he worked with, what would you say the word is? These are corresponding colleagues of his or colleagues that are also Advanced Concepts Office program managers at Wright-Patterson. Wright-Patterson had an AFRL detachment. And Charles Suchamel was the program manager there for that Advanced Concepts group. Sorry, I'm going to keep jumping in, Eric. What did this have to do with your own investigations into? This is where a lot of my information came from.
Okay, got you.
Okay. Then after that, I'm working for Hal Pitoff starting in 2004. Even though I'm still doing another 2.5 years worth of work for AFRL. I'm now working full time as Hal Puthoff's senior research physicist and chief science officer. And so during that era, just let's see, 3 years after I started, the OSAP began. And it didn't begin as the program, it began as in the paperwork phase when Bigelow Aerospace is responding to the DIA's broad area announcement. And we got pulled in because Hal Puthoff has got decades of experience, both as a Naval Reserve officer at the National Security Agency, but also as a high-level program manager at SRI, which Stanford Research Institute, as it was known then, at Stanford University.
Okay, okay. I'm going to jump in again because I think what I want to give people a sense of is what you learned in that subsequent Air Force job that came after NIDS, and then also as you guys were ramping up to this program called OSAP, which Harry Reid initiated, because not everybody knows all the this arcane stuff. So you learned some new things with the Air Force job. You learned some new things while you're working on the OSAP.
Yeah, so Hal Puthoff got brought in to help write the response to the BAA. That's a broad area announcement, which the DIA had put on the website, public, and so he helped do the paperwork because Bigelow Aerospace did not have that kind of experience, and there was a competitive bid process of which Bigelow Aerospace won the contract. And so then we got recruited or tacked on to the program as the science advisors. And so we did a lot of tasking. And part of my job was given to me by Jim Lukatsky, who is the DIA program manager, was to hunt down the crash retrieval program. Little did I know, he already knew about it. He already knew some aspects about it. And in more ways than one, he talks about it in his first book that came out last year. He talked about having access to one of those recovered vehicles and going inside of it. So this was not known to us because he did, as far as we knew, Hal Puthoff, Colin Kelleher, and I, and Jacques Vallée, we had not been told anything about that by Jim Lukatsky himself. However, during the course of that project, which ended roughly 2011, we came across information through some work that Hal and I was doing already. Since 2004, we were already involved with a large interdisciplinary physics group with the Lockheed Martin's Space and Missile Company, because the senior VP of that company was also dual-hatted as the director of Lockheed Martin's Advanced Technology Center. And so we were working under his supervision and sponsorship at the Advanced Technology Center on work to study the structure and nature of the quantum vacuum for possible applications in a variety of industrial uses, advanced physics laboratory uses, and maybe even exploring the possibility of whether you could extract useful energy from the quantum vacuum. And I'm not talking about Casimir cavities here. That was excluded because for physics reasons, you can't use a Casimir cavity to extract energy to generate net useful work or net useful energy to output. So I'm not going to get into the physics of that. But anyway, so as part of the work during the OSAP, Hal Puthoff and I were charged with looking into the crash retrieval program. And it was really landed on my lap more specifically because I had a lot more experience with it, starting with my job at NIDS when I worked for Bob Bigelow. And Hal's too busy running his company, EarthTech International Incorporated, and the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin, here in Austin, Texas. And he's busy with contract things and supervising personnel and activities, tasking, and producing the deliverables that we had to give to Lukatsky at the DIA as well as Bigelow, and or the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. So most of the work on the crash retrieval investigations fell on my lap. And both Hal and I were deputized with a letter of introduction from Jim Lukatsky on DIA stationery that explained to the reader that we had security clearances shown on our courier cards and that we had all access and eligibility and need to know for classified information pertaining to UAP of any kind. And this was a way of getting us through the front door of these very difficult to find and very difficult to get into, or very difficult to even get an invitation to get into the crash retrieval programs.
Now, you guys weren't just trying to verify that program was there. You guys were actually wanting to interact with it to get
Correct.
scientific information on physics, to see if they'd made discoveries and so on.
That's right. That's exactly right. That was part of the tasking under the OSAP, was for us to find that information and bring it into the OSAP. And also, this led us to the senior vice president of Lockheed Martin Space and Missiles Company, who was dual-hatted as the director of Lockheed Martin's Advanced Technology Center in Northern California. And so Hal and I were already working with him on quantum vacuum zero-point energy studies. It was an internal research and development funded project that he oversaw. He was sponsoring it, supervising it. He had a senior senior project engineer with a nuclear energy background to oversee us on a day-to-day basis. So we were a big, really just 6 of us were an interdisciplinary group.
And so what did he have to do with the legacy program and UAP secrecy?
Just let me get to that. So basically, we had this program on studying the quantum vacuum structure, and in our interactions with the senior VP, we found out from him that he had worked on the crash retrieval program, starting right after he was hired by a program manager at Lockheed Skunk Works. And so he and a future coworker of his both attended universities in Illinois. They both graduated with their doctorates in 1970. She was a mathematician. The senior VP, I'm speaking of, graduated with earned his PhD in material science. So they both got recruited and hired by a very senior, high level, actually the number one man at a facility in the Lockheed Aircraft Company family, because Lockheed is all over the country doing different things. So in that family, they have a particular campus operating, or not a facility operating very classified programs, and that's where he and his mathematician colleague got hired to work into. And the job that they did for the next 20 years or so was the crash retrieval program.
Okay, and then he told you this, not just in confidence, but officially he was able to.
Right. He first met with Hal because Hal had already been interacting with him for the quantum vacuum physics project, or the IRAD project that we were working for under this senior VP. And IRAD, once again, is internal research and development funding that a company comes up with from a chunk of their profits that they dedicate to that purpose, to help facilitate the development of solutions, technical solutions, software solutions, or what have you, to their business line, their commercial products line, which also includes defense and intelligence business lines. And so basically, in an official capacity in a SCIF, which is a sensitive compartmentalized information facility. So it's a very secured facility. It's very controlled access to get in.
So in a SCIF, he communicated to you both that he had been involved in this program, that it had been among his job responsibilities for 2 decades, and legally exposed you guys to some information concerning that program.
He worked on the program.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, he worked on it along with the mathematician and 3 other people. And let's see, besides the 3 other people, I think that's the correct number. And so he talked about that in the SCIF with Bob Bigelow and probably Colin Kelleher. And I do know that definitely, yes, Hal Putoff. And so then he made a visit out to Bigelow Aerospace in North Las Vegas, and they repeated those conversations, or carried further those conversations that they had in California. And then I had my interactions with him because I was already working on the quantum vacuum energy and quantum vacuum structure project after Hal hired me in late 2004. And so I got pulled into that because my background is in quantum field theory and general relativity. So, quantum vacuum energy is a feature of quantum field theory. It's a major feature. so, so basically, I had many interactions with the senior VP, and there were times when I need to go to San Jose or San Francisco to attend technical conferences like the IEEE conferences or the SPI Photonics West Conference. That's the International Society for Optics and Photonics. They call it SPIE.
And so you interacted with him frequently, you're saying, when you were
Yeah,
in
just
San
about twice
Francisco?
a year.
Okay.
During the OSAP, and then
So Eric, I want to slow you down and ask you, I mean, at some point, he's telling you directly, just as he told your colleagues directly, that he worked on this program. This program's real. He's disclosing some things about this. I mean, how did you feel about this? You'd already known it was real. You had a major admiral.
Oh, that was a big eye opener. That was
Okay.
like I had already investigated an aerospace industry source who worked on the crash retrieval program at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during the latter part of the Cold War, and so I already had confirmation that this program existed, but only at that company. This individual I investigated was working for a aerospace company that had a facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And that facility, I think, was established during the 60s. And the company was established in 1960. And so
Now,
basically,
can you say the name of that company publicly? I don't see a reason you couldn't.
say again?
Can you say the name of that company publicly?
Yeah, I'll go ahead
I
and
think
say
so.
the name of that company was TRW.
Right.
This was their space and electronics division, and this is so they had a facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base probably since the foundation of the company in 1960, and they continued in operation until TRW was bought out by Northrop Grumman. Well, at least the space and electronics division part that I'm aware of. I think the automotive parts part of that company got spun off somewhere else. But the space and electronics division is the one I'm aware of that Northrop Grumman bought like 2000 in the 2000 to 2002
And so
period.
that was that was an initial verification.
That was an initial
of that
verification
program.
that took place during the latter part of the 90s when I was at NIDS. Now here it is. We're in the mid, going into the late 2000s, and I'm working for Hal Puthoff at Earth Tech International Incorporated here in Austin, and we're dealing directly on, we're working on a classified UAP program that's run by the Defense Intelligence Agency. And during the course of our work, during the course of other work that Hal Puthoff and I had going on a physics project that Lockheed Martin was funding during that era, we found out that one of their senior VPs who we were working with on the quantum vacuum energy project had worked on the crash retrieval program at his company.
Yeah, and you just said that was a big deal to you to discover that.
Yeah, because now it's coming from a second company. I already had information circa 2004, maybe, circa 2003, actually. I already had information from a formerly classified and heavily proprietary Douglas Aircraft Company set of documents, which included a very thick 64 slide. Back in those days, they had transparencies for what we would consider to be a slideshow presentation. So 64 transparencies of a gravity control presentation by Dr. Bob Woods at Douglas Aircraft Company. And he was working on UAP investigations to find ways to ascertain from witness statements, any other evidence, anything measurable that could give hints on the type of propulsion that drives a UAP. And so he got approval from old man Douglas to run this program in the late 60s. So 1968, he's giving a program update to his management, and there's a 64 slide presentation, of which the last or next to last one named the principal companies that were actually involved with UAP investigations, and those companies were identified. And so that was my first indication that it was that Lockheed and TRW were involved. This came later after NIDS. So I was already out of NIDS by the end of April 2002. So this kind of corroborated my TRW investigation in the late 90s. And then with the senior VP at Lockheed Martin coming forth and talking to Hal Puthoff and I and Bob Bigelow and Colin Kelleher and whatnot, the startling thing is he's revealing that he was one of the engineers that worked on the crash retrieval program with 4 other individuals. And he told us at an TSSCI level, which is the clearance level we had at the OSAP, he was able to share that level of information with us. But there were more questions that we had, detailed questions, and he was not able to answer those detailed questions because that's now rising up to the level of what's called the Waived Unacknowledged Special Access Program, which is the security cover that was provided for all of the crash retrieval programs that were going on since probably that Italian crash of 33 that had gotten recovered by the U.S. Army during its invasion of Italy in 1944 and transferred back to Wright Army Airfield that year. And so basically, this was kind of startling because now it's like, okay, we're actually talking to somebody who's at a senior executive level in a major aerospace defense corporation that's pretty huge, and it's actually the largest in the world. And the profits this company makes is obscene. And,
okay, so your even though
so there's credibility behind it. And of course this is all in classified settings. So we know this is all legitimate. The only problem is we couldn't get further because we needed to get waived unacknowledged SAP clearances, and unfortunately, I don't know what was going on in the background of that. I do know that Harry Reid and Jim Lukatsky attempted to get that kind of security clearances for all of us, and Harry Reid failed because the Deputy Secretary of Defense during that period, which was the Bush administration, was William Lynn. And I might be wrong. It might have been the beginning of the Obama administration. I'm a little fuzzy on which year Obama came into office. Wasn't it 2009, I think?
Yeah, 2009.
Yeah, okay, so it would have been William Lynn then in the Obama administration. So he turned it down. He turned down Harry Reid's request, but that was easy to understand because Harry Reid was not going through normal channels to make a legitimate request. It really had to go through Lukatsky.
Interesting. I want to make sure people know where we are with this. You're talking about the person who was then the majority leader of the Senate, Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, who initiated the project, the UAP research project that you and your colleagues were working on. So I want to go. I want to go back to something here, which is that you guys are discovering this program is real, and that's stimulating you to try to get further access to the information it has.
Really,
yeah,
because the OSAPs look the OSAPs. I don't want to really speak for Jim Lukatsky, but I'm looking at all the years we worked on this, all of our conversations, both private and face-to-face. I had face-to-face conversation with Lukatsky before he went on a medical leave of absence when we met up at the Army Research Lab in Adelphi, Maryland, to attend a workshop. And we got together. We went off someplace very quiet where there was nobody around, and we had some discussions about this topic. The main thing, the main drive was the theme. The word I was looking for, the overall theme we had is we have a phenomenon. We know it's real. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know what its motivation is. And there is evidence. There's not only classified military evidence, but there's unclassified civilian evidence. And there's scientifically analyzed civilian evidence. And so the evidence is pretty overwhelming. And And so essentially, hang on, Peter. So essentially, we're looking at it as the sum total of our understanding of the phenomenon is it has had a negative interaction with the human race for the most part. This isn't the classic 1960s, 70s, and 80s space brothers era. No, this phenomenon is not a space brother by any means, not by far. It does have malevolent tendencies, and it has severe, stark, malevolent impact on people like Colares Island, Brazil, circa 1978 period, where hundreds and hundreds of innocent people were either injured um, and I don't remember if any were killed. I think there were a few, or my memory's fuzzy, but I do remember seeing a histogram chart of the different types of injuries that were reported by the medical doctors that saw the victims, and it was a lot. It was a lot of injuries. I just don't remember if people had been actually killed during that encounter, and that was a very long, moldy day encounter back in those days. And so we see this, and then we see what happened with the USS Nimitz carrier strike group in the first week of November 2004. So this is an interference by a tic tac shaped UAP with the carrier strike group's certification operations down in the ocean way southwest of San Diego, and so they're going to be deployed to Persian Gulf, and the problem is they have to be certified before they can enter combat deployment. So they're doing the pilot flying. The pilots on the aircraft carrier have to do their flying routines and practice attacks and whatever con ops that they've designed for their deployment in the Persian Gulf. And the ships have to do the same thing. The surface warships and submarines that are in that strike group have to act like in a simulated fashion what type of scenarios they could be coming up against, and they've got to plan and prepare and get all the personnel spun up and ready to go so that they don't trip over themselves when something real happens during the Persian Gulf, so that they can effectively do their job. And so they had this interference from this tic tac, and I think it was I know it was multiple days. I don't think it was multiple tic tac. I know it was one single tic tac always reported, but it was over a multiple day period. Then we have later on we have the events off the east coast of the United States, off of Norfolk, Virginia, with the USS Roosevelt carrier strike group and other surface ships and aircraft. Even the fighter pilots and transport pilots were being interfered with by more UAP. And then over time, more information came out in the newspapers about UAP going into or coming out of the ocean in front of surface warships at close range. And so we're looking at the sum total of all of this. And even if you look at, and I'm going to add on one more thing, Jacques Vallée and Chris Auerbach's historical documentation of UAP interactions with European civilization for over a 1,500-year period. This is starting before the 19th century, going all the way back 1,500 years in the past. And what they published in their book shows, again, interference by UAP. So the overall theme that we formed is that UAP is malevolent, and it's a threat, and it could be a threat. And it is a threat only in the sense that it has interfered with U.S. military operations. As you probably saw in the Age of Disclosure documentary film by Dan Farah, we have a number of retired Air Force security personnel and senior officers who work in the missile command centers of the Northern Tier Strategic Air Command's Minuteman I and Minuteman II missile bases. They had events in the late 60s, I think 68, 67, that period. And again, that happened in 1975 period. And where a big UFO is hovering over an ICBM and it shuts down a dozen ICBMs sitting in their missile silos, the warheads are shut down, the rocket, the launch vehicle is shut down, and they did it to the Soviet Union. So the craft go over there and they also shut down a dozen Soviet ICBM silos. The missiles are dead, the warheads are dead, and those are nuclear warheads. And their guidance, navigation, and controls are all dead. Nothing works. This could have led to a catastrophic miscalculation if something would have triggered it, so that the dozen U.S. Minuteman ICBMs that are dead, if something had triggered the Soviet Union to attack us, those missiles would be we couldn't use them. They'd be dead. So we're in trouble. Yeah, and the same vice versa with them when they got their situation shut down. So this has been a threat, and we see no positive, contact where they're here and they're openly exchanging information. They want to contact the elite scientist of the world. They want to give us something. They want us to give them something. They want dialogue. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing the Space Brothers stuff. We're seeing probably one step beyond the day the Earth stood still. This is where Gord is actually destroying things because that's what appears to be going on. They're harming people. They've harmed individual civilians. They've harmed Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum back in December of 1980 on their road trip outside of Houston. And they harmed Travis Walton also in that period of time. They harmed 2 security police officers at the Joint Air Base Lakenhurst and Bentwaters, I believe it was. And that was the Rendlesham Forest incident, also December 1980. And those 2 gentlemen got absorbed some ionizing radiation and endured some horrific health effects, of which they were classified. They couldn't get treatments because the Air Force classified their medical files. So it took Senator John McCain to force the Department of the Air Force probably to release John Burroughs' medical records. I don't know what happened to Peniston's medical records. He probably, I haven't heard his story, but I met John Burroughs. He came to visit Hal and I. So this is the theme we see. And this is why we want access to the crash retrieval technology. We want access to it because they've gone 80 years without successfully reverse engineering anything. They have a basic understanding of the material science that's involved, but they don't know how to fabricate it, reproduce it on Earth in our best aerospace defense factories. And propulsion and power, geez, that's even a bigger mystery because Lukatsky said in his first book that he went inside a craft and they didn't recognize any propulsion or power system. So it's like, how are these things flying? So we want to get access to that because we want to look at beefing because we're getting too close to parity with China. Russia, I know a lot of people in the DOD or the Department of War are going to disagree with me. I don't consider them to be a near peer anymore. They've got nuclear weapons, sure, but they've been losing terribly on the battlefield in Ukraine, and they've been only inching along here just recently. China's our main problem. And
Eric, I hate to interrupt you, but we have to go to a break. So
okay.
We're going to go to a break and come back, and then I'm going to pick up some of these threads.
Okay.
We got a lot in play here. So
good.
The Soul Foundation is dedicated to advancing groundbreaking research on UAP and shaping the global conversation about the phenomena, governmental and societal disclosure, and related frontier topics like consciousness. By becoming a Soul member, you join and financially support a network of deep thinkers, scientists, and policymakers committed to these vital explorations. To join, go to thesoulfoundation.org or click the link in the description below.
Okay, welcome back to the Soul Forum. We're here with physicist and UAP investigator Eric Davis. Eric, you've been giving us, almost multiple encyclopedia entries on different aspects of UAP, not just UAP secrecy. So, to kind of help the audience along in following you, I want to go back to some things you said. And the first thing I want to touch on, it's a very simple issue, but I think there's a lot of confusion about it out there among people that don't quite understand the intelligence community. When you're in a secure compartmented information facility, a SCIF, these are soundproofed rooms that, it's difficult for foreign intelligence services to gain access to remotely with listening devices and so on to hear what's being said. When you're in those rooms and you have the high clearance you had at the time, you had a top secret SCI clearance that's
right.
that this is, it doesn't, it's only going to get much better than that if you go up to these higher programs you talked about, USAPs and WUSAPs. You're not hearing rumors when you're in a skiff and you're
Oh
being
God,
given a
no! This
briefing.
is
Right,
okay. When
but
you
you
go
need to
into a
you
you
need to
do a
explain that,
classified.
because people don't get this. They think you guys go in there and you're kind of talking casually and random things get said and then you walk out confused.
No, you get an official briefing. You can have you can have a casual conversation, which is going to contain classified information, and you could get a formal briefing, which would be a PowerPoint slide presentation. You could be shown something in the way of a file containing documents, photographs. You might even get to see a classified video shown from a projector in the room. And so, no, you're talking facts. You don't go into a skiff to exercise the field security officer and the skiff security officer into going through the process and the motion of transmitting your clearances from your field security officer at Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies to the facility security officer at Lockheed Martin, and then he's got to get the skiff officer, skiff security officer, get you signed in or signed up, scheduled for the skiff meeting. The skiff's got to be scheduled for use, otherwise somebody else will schedule it and use it ahead of you, or at the time you desire. So you're putting personnel through the paces, and you don't do that just for rumors.
Right,
That's how it
right.
works.
And
It's
so
official
if
business.
you're in a skiff then receiving a briefing from a senior vice president of Lockheed Martin about any classified subject, you both know as professionals, as a professional that he's telling you the truth. He's not feeding you
He has
disinformation.
to. Yeah, that's right. This can't be rumor mongering because this is an aerospace company. They're not in the counterintelligence business. They're not there to fool us.
Mhm.
So this is the factual conversation because he understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what our goals are, and what our tasking orders are from our government customer. He knew our government customer was a certain division in the Defense Intelligence Agency. He knew who our program manager was. He knew that Jay Stratton worked with that program manager being Jim Lukatsky, and so forth. So we're putting security officers, paperwork, and this is all official documentation because auditing is done on the use of a skiff and the content. You can't really audit the content because that's classified. Need to know to the people who are in the skiff having a meeting. Okay, but the fact that you're having a meeting, you're using the facility, that's got to be documented. And who has security clearances with eligibility and need to know to get access to that skip? Who's got the site visit approval? Who submitted the site visit request? All of that is security personnel documentation. It's got to be kept in files. It has to be audited annually by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency and other DoD security components that are associated with the government customers that Lockheed Martin or TRW or whoever serves, as well as the government customers themselves. I mean, you're going to involve the DIA as well, because the
Right.
DIA is going to
Okay.
be is the sponsoring agency behind our.
So a
So
listener
you're only
can,
there getting factual information, Peter, and that's all that's
yeah.
being discussed.
Yeah, and a professional, whether they work for the government or for a contractor, knows
Correct.
that, especially at that level. And I think that's very important for people to understand because there's been a lot of misunderstanding publicly that, as I said, you guys are listening to rumors in classified environments and then inflating their significance. And
Yeah, and what you just said was in the most grossest way possible propagated by Sean Kirkpatrick in his Volume 1 report to Congress before he left Arrow.
yeah, and
And
let's
and
come
he
back
was
to let's
accusing us of that. And that's probably the most blatant lie because I met with him and his assistant, Lieutenant Colonel Kelsey Barnett, who's an Army Reserve officer and a counterintelligence special agent, or the counterintelligence officer, I guess you would say. And so I briefed them and answered all their questions on everything I've done in this business ever since NIDS. And that was in a skiff at TSSCI levels. And that was at the DIA's Missile and Space Intelligence Center at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. That's because I was working there for the Aerospace Corporation to support NASA's nuclear thermal propulsion engine development and flight test program during that era, during the recent years. And so I met with them in January of 23, and I know that Kelsey heard every word I said, but I don't think Sean heard every word I said, because he took every word I said as if it was rumors and put together a very antagonistic, very ad hominem or attack-oriented thread or narrative on what we were doing at OSAP that was factually false, and it was just absurd.
Well, and we should come back to that later, because in fact, that did influence some people in media and in Congress to think
Yes,
that, certain claims that you and others were bringing to Congress that, as you're demonstrating, were based on investigation and based on formal briefings,
that's
were
right.
kind of fantasies. But I want to go back to the late '90s and 2000s as you're investigating this stuff, because what we really want to do here is unpack some of the things you said in Age of Disclosure, and go into how you know them. But I think you've demonstrated pretty well how you know them. You know them through professional channels, through official work for that you're doing in the course of government contracting, and you know it through official briefings too. So let's go into some of those claims. You also put on the table in the film, not just that there is a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. You also stated that you were aware of at least one president's awareness of that program, and even a more astonishing event that program would have known about.
Yes.
And so let's talk about that a bit.
Okay.
You've told many of us in private, and now you've said it in the film, that you were in contact with President George Herbert Walker Bush after
Correct.
his retirement, I believe in the early 2000s.
Yes, it was in 2003, and again in 2004.
Okay, so how did that come about? I mean,
That's a long story, but Hal Puthoff, myself, and John Alexander were all members of AFIO. That's the Association of Former Intelligence Officers. And it's not an association just for former/retired intelligence officers. They also accept active duty intelligence officers as members, both civilian and military, uniform military. And so John Alexander and I were involved in an effort to start a new chapter, an AFIO chapter in Las Vegas in 2002. And so you have to meet, you have to go through, or meet, I guess I could use that word, meet the qualifications to get a charter established when you stand up a new chapter. And so during the course of that, you check off all the boxes, and then the president of AFIO and the executive director of AFIO are going to come to the chapter, attend a dinner, one of the weekly or twice monthly dinner banquets, and then they'll award us our charter. Because we checked off all the boxes, we met the membership requirements locally, and we're doing the things to promote membership benefits to those local members to qualify for a charter. So during that, I'm exposed to senior intelligence and counterintelligence officials at the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Agency. And I also get to talk with the executive director of AFIO, who is deceased as of 2003. His wife died of cancer early that year, and then he was in the Pentagon gym and had a heart attack and died in September of that year. So anyway, before that all happened, he facilitated my contact with George Herbert Walker Bush. And that came about because he had learned during the course of our chartering activities that year to build ourselves up to getting, that awarded charter, the backgrounds of John Alexander and myself, and the fact that we had worked for Bigelow, for Bob Bigelow at NIDS, and I helped Bigelow stand up Bigelow Aerospace in the very early years. So anyway, he heard about that, and one thing led to another, and he said, "Oh, by the way, we have two honorary chairmen of the board of AFIO. One of them is George Herbert Walker Bush, and he's got a story about UFOs that you may want to hear. It'll probably knock your socks off, actually." And so he arranged for the connection to be made. I got in contact with him by phone, with former President Bush by phone. And just to be sure, when I say President Bush or former President Bush, I'm referring to the senior, not the junior, not W, but George Herbert Walker Bush, and GHWB. And so we had a series of phone calls where he would call me a lot, and he'd be in transit somewhere, and he would have some time to chat with me. And so we would probably have about 20, 30 minutes to chat, maybe even less several times. And I would cover a lot of the significant topics. Now, the points of focus here was his induction his confirmation as the new CIA director in the Ford administration. And so he's now the incoming CIA director, and he's now being officially briefed by his directorate chiefs. Those are the deputy director of the Directorate of Intelligence, Science and Technology, operations, this and that and the other thing. And so during one of his briefings, he meets with his DOD liaison officer. And his DOD liaison officer is a uniformed officer who was not identified to me. I don't know what rank the man was, but he's uniformed service. And he comes over from the Pentagon because he liaisons in his job serving the Secretary of Defense. And actually, back in those days, he would have been in Chris Mellon's old job. He would have been the Assistant Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. I think that's the title. But that was the number 3 man or number 3 position in all of the DOD's structure. So this guy worked for that individual, and his job is to liaison with the CIA director or any of his subordinates that he designates. So Bush is getting read in to get up to speed on everything. He's starting his new job at the CIA, and the liaison officer mistakenly thought that Bush had been read in on the UAP subject. And so he started blabbing off about the latest on that. And Bush said, "No, wait a minute. What are we talking about here?" And the liaison officer told him, "I thought you had been briefed on this by your senior staff." And he said, "No, actually, I haven't been briefed on that topic. If yet, or if at all, I have not." And so the liaison officer then had already let loose the information. So he went ahead and completed the rest of that briefing. And that's when Bush learned about a landing at an Air Force base in New Mexico by a UFO, humanoid type, non-human intelligence came off the craft and actually met with uniformed senior Air Force officers and some civilian CIA personnel. And
Okay,
they went off.
and you're referring to an event that is often just called the Holloman landing.
The
It took
Holloman
place at Holloman Air Force Base in
Yep.
April of 1964.
That's right. And that was, and what was interesting about that was one of 2 of my topics, is because that scenario came up in Bob Emenegger and Adam Sandler's documentary film that I believe was aired on CBS in 1974, UFOs. I believe the title, It Has Begun. I might have it backwards. They reissued that documentary back in later, like 1976, 77, and they expanded it by so many more minutes and added Jacques Vallée as a co-host. And so in both of those versions of the documentary, they brought up the Holloman landing film as a hypothetical scenario of U.S. government contact with ET. And Emenegger had a companion book with that documentary, and it was by the same title as the original first documentary of '74. And there's a chapter in that book that was authored by a former Army psychologist, a psychological warfare expert. And so the surrounding story that I learned through many people in the government, retired, was that was not supposed to be a scenario. It was planned that part of that documentary was going to air the landing film, the film that was taken by a helicopter crew that was on its way out of Holloman to White Sands Missile Base because they were going to record some flight testing of missiles. And so they got called by the traffic control tower to turn right back around, get to the runway ASAP. There's going to be 3 craft coming in of unknown origin, and start filming it. So that's what they did. They hovered somewhere nearby the runway, and they saw the 3 craft come in, and one of the 3 craft landed. The other 2 craft took off, and they filmed somebody coming off that craft and going to meet the aforementioned uniformed Air Force and civilian CIA personnel. And that was described to be, and Bush confirmed this. So Bush said his liaison officer from the Pentagon told him this in detail. So he confirmed all of what I just said. The NIH being looked Nordic, like Northern Europe, big tall guy, white. He had some kind of a metal fabric one-piece suit on. He had an apparatus over his face. His face looked humanoid, and they thought that might have been a breathing apparatus because probably he couldn't breathe our air. And then he had an object in his hand that looked like a staff. They were speculating that was a translator. You couldn't see him talking, but maybe it was telepathic, and the translator turned it into electronic voices. Who knows? This is just speculation. And this is what Bush was told, but Bush was told that it was a matter of fact. And the problem is Bush really got heavily interested in this, and he wanted to know more. And he asked for the files, the records, and to see the film. And the liaison officer told him, "I'm sorry, Mr. Director, but you don't have access to that information. You can get access to that information if something happens with the CIA such that this topic comes up, and you need to take a specific action that requires a presidential authority. Then what you'll need to do is call the president's national security advisor. He is the point of contact for everything UAP in the White House. So his job is to connect you up with the president, to arrange for you to give a briefing so that you could tell the president what the issue is, and that you'll need the president's official decision so that you can carry out an action in response to whatever the UFO incident is." That's what Bush told me he was told by the liaison officer.
So Eric, I'm gonna jump in. I've been just listening to this, and probably people listening are wondering why I'm not reacting, because of course this is completely astonishing, right? If you've never heard this before. So I want to ask you some follow-up questions about this. One question is, I mean, what did Bush say to you? Let's presume I presume that you're telling me the truth, and I would like people listening to presume that. You've illustrated so far that you're a reliable witness in the sense that you present an abundance of details when you're talking about a situation or a conversation, a interaction, a timeline. So we have a lot of contextual information, enough that would give us a sense that we can trust you. So let's presume this conversation happened. What did Bush say about the fact that he discovers as a new CIA director that he wouldn't have access to this information?
That's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. The White House runs the corral. So when the cattle are told you can get information, then the cattle will get the information. But he was told he's one of the cattle, and they decide that in this particular instance, the liaison officer made a mistake by assuming that he had already been read in on the Holloman landing film when he wasn't, because that's what he was leading off with, was crash retrieval, alien contact with the government, and that kind of thing. And then he realizes, oh my gosh, Bush is acting. Bush told me he was really puzzled because he didn't know what the guy was talking about. And so they finally figured out that the guy assumed that Bush had been briefed on this subject, and Bush said, "No, I have not been briefed." And so the liaison officer is wrapping that up by just giving him the overall gist of what happened at that event. And then Bush had requested specific details. He wanted to actually see the evidence. And that's when he was told by the liaison officer, you cannot have access to that as evidence. You have to go through the National Security Advisor to get access to that evidence. But before that happens, somebody in your organization who, the CIA, that would be Bush's organization, somebody who holds that portfolio or owns it, will be instructed to give Bush a full briefing on everything before Bush can go to the president to talk about whatever the UFO or slash UAP event occurred that requires him to go see a president. So then you just need to go through a higher threshold of need to know. And that's what the liaison officer was telling Bush. And that's how Bush told me. Uh, he just said, for all intents and purposes, there's a higher threshold of need to know for you to get the specific details down to the last sheet of paper and photograph or films. And you haven't met that threshold yet. When that threshold occurs, that's when you get briefed. And permission will be given for you to get briefed. And then you go see the president to talk about whatever the big issue is that you've got. But it's got to be relevant to this alien contact situation. That's what it all surrounds. That was only one half of that conversation. The second half of that conversation was to verify Phil Corso.
Okay, and you should tell us who Phil Corso is.
So Phil Corso is a retired lieutenant colonel, United States Army. He was in the invasion force of Italy. He was an intelligence officer. So he was doing whatever he was supposed to be doing during that era of World War II. And his commanding officer was General Arthur Trudeau. So World War II ends. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember that at some point, I think Corso ends up mustering out of the Army later than World War II. It's kind of fuzzy, yeah. But he's mustered out of the Army. He's looking for work. Trudeau is now a lieutenant general in charge of what we would now call the Army Research Lab, so the Army R&D lab back in those days. So Trudeau meets up with Corso. Corso's looking for a job. He's a civilian now. He's out of the Army. And Trudeau hires him to be a program manager in the executive office function of this agency, this Army Research and Development Agency. And so Corso wrote the book Day After Roswell with Bill Burns, who was his co-author. But Bill Burns wrote a fairly big chunk of the book. Corso's story about UFOs, Roswell, that whole 9 yards, crash retrieval materials and stuff, that occupied roughly a chapter, I think, in his handwritten autobiography. So he has a handwritten autobiography, and he's trying to sell it. He wants to sell it, but he's such an awful writer. I've got a copy of it, and he doesn't know how to tell a story very engagingly. So he went to Bigelow. He went to Bigelow, the Bigelow Foundation, talked to Bob Bigelow and several members of the NIDS SAB who met with him, assessed him, looked into his background, looked into his credibility, and said, yes, he is the real deal. He was a retired Army lieutenant colonel in the Army Intelligence Corps. And he did serve in Italy during the invasion of Italy to drive the Third Reich out when the Allies took over and liberated that country. And so he did work for Arthur Trudeau, who was his commanding officer. And he did muster out some time in the later years out of the Army, became a civilian, and ended up getting hired by Lieutenant General Arthur Trudeau to work on an aspect of the crash retrieval program in which components that were coming out of the program were sent to Corso, and Corso's job was to do the equivalent of issue CRADA, or broad area announcement contracts, to various defense intelligence or defense aerospace companies for them to reverse engineer these components. And these components came from crash retrievals of UAP craft. And that's the gist of the story he told. The problem is he's such a poor writer that Bill Burns embellished that book heavily and wrote a bunch of nonsense about Star Wars, Reagan, alien invasion, and all this stuff in it. And it got hyped up pretty bad. And it made it so engaging of a read that it was the New York Times bestseller for a whole year, I think, or even longer. Senator Strom Thurmond wrote the foreword, but after there were bitches and griping about that foreword, Thurmond thought he was taking a reputational hit, so he asked the publisher. I can't remember, was the publisher Penguin Press or something? They were part of Vince. It was Vince Cerf's publishing house. He was one of the panelists on What's My Line, and he owned the publisher. Oh, Random House, I think it was Random House. So this was this book. The publisher of The Day After Roswell was a Random House affiliate publisher, and I thought it was Penguin.
Okay, but let's go.
But anyway,
let's go back to what Corso did. He was distributing, allegedly, he claimed pieces of.
No, he didn't allegedly. He did claim. He did make that claim.
Yes, I understand.
And these are the areas that Burns didn't mess up, but Burns or rewrite. Burns rewrote a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, we got that. So he was distributing. He claimed pieces of fragments of recovered technology to defense aerospace
components. And the purpose of bringing that up with George Herbert Walker Bush was to find out if there was truth to it. And I just wanted to know what he knew about it back in those days. Let's see, not the days when the book came out in the late 90s. We're talking the 1950s, 60s, and 70s era. And all Bush was able to tell me is that he was personal friends with Lieutenant General Trudeau, and they occasionally went golfing in Washington, D.C. And so there was one fine day they're golfing, and that was the year that Ford and Rumsfeld, Congressman Gerald Ford and Congressman Donald Rumsfeld, were holding their UFO hearings in the House of Representatives on a subcommittee. So they're holding these hearings, and George Herbert Walker Bush told me that he's golfing with Trudeau, and Trudeau told him to get prepared mentally because the next day or so, Corso, his underling Corso, who used to work for him, this golfing outing is taking place, like I said, circa 68. And Corso's long gone. He's no longer working for General Trudeau. He's out. He's out of that job sometime in the 50s or maybe early 60s. So Trudeau's telling Bush during a golf outing that his old longtime friend from World War II, from their days in Italy, is supposed to be subpoenaed to give testimony, public testimony, at the Ford Rumsfeld hearings, that he was going to be asked questions about the recovery of a number of UFO crashes, including a couple that landed, were intact craft, and what his role at the Army Research and Development Lab, working under Trudeau, was in handling that stuff, and why they were handling it, what they were doing with it, and so he wanted Bush to get mentally prepared that it was going to be new. It's going to be like lightning all around the world when, because this is going to expose the existence of the crash retrieval program. The fact that the U.S. government had recovered either landed or wrecked alien craft, and so forth. And so it didn't happen. So that did not happen. And I asked Bush what happened to that. And he said, well, a couple months go by, I called up Trudeau and I said, hey, do we have time to do some golfing on this Saturday? And Trudeau said, yeah, let's get together. So he asked Trudeau on the phone, by the way, your guy Corso never was on TV, or there's no news about it on the front page of the Washington newspapers or anywhere else. I didn't even hear about it on the radio. And Trudeau said that's because that got quashed by the White House. The White House got a hold of that information, and they got the White House counsel and the Attorney General to quash the subpoena, because this was considered one of the most top secret, or quote, above top secret programs, and they could not allow Corso to give public testimony under oath. And they also said that Ford and Rumsfeld did not make available a classified venue at which Corso could give a classified briefing, but he would have to be given permission from the Department of the Defense to do so. And that did not happen. So that's what generally happened. That's what Bush told me is what Trudeau had told him. And Trudeau said that the White House General Counsel and the Attorney General of the United States quashed it by exerting executive privilege over Corso's testimony, and that it was classified and that they didn't have a need to know it, and it wasn't a part of any kind of a criminal investigation, or it wasn't even a part of any official government oversight role. This was just the subject of UFOs generally that Ford and Rumsfeld were investigating by talking to experts and witnesses. That was it. So this having Corso went beyond the scope of that, and they quashed the subpoena, and thus Corso never gave the testimony. And this was not written about by Corso. It wasn't written about in any other venue. Corso never talked about it in any interviews he gave. But this was Trudeau telling Bush this.
So, Eric, again, I'm just letting you go and not interrupting because this is crucial testimony for people to hear. But I mean, look, you're saying that you heard this directly out of the mouth of a former U.S. president.
Yes.
What did he have to say about this? Because he would have been quite shocked in the '60s to find out that was real.
Yeah.
And then also to discover that the White House had kind of stopped the testimony from taking place.
Yeah, he was very puzzled by it. He was perplexed. He was still puzzled by it all the way up to the year 2003 when we talked about it on the phone. He said he never paid attention to the UFO topic. Oh, he came across occasional newspaper article he might see down in Texas. He primarily lived down in Houston. He also lived in parts of West Texas, I think, at some time when he was in the oil industry. And so even after he was retired from the presidency, when he was president after Reagan, he would come across the occasional newspaper article, magazine article, or a television show, or what have you. And he was always perplexed. It just didn't capture his attention. It's just that when he heard it from Trudeau, a trusted friend, a golf partner, that this was going on, it just blew his mind. But at the end of the day, he said something to me on the order of, I still can't be surprised by it because even when I was president, I wasn't told anything. But when I was CIA director, I was told something about it, and it was an accident because his Pentagon liaison officer, or maybe I should say it's the Pentagon liaison officer to the CIA, mistakenly assumed that Bush had some level of briefing on the topic and was going to dive into some specifics, and then realized too late that Bush had not been briefed on it and hadn't gone through the proper threshold to be allowed to know about it.
As you explained.
So that's where it is. It's that the same story today as what we found out during the OSAP. The director of the CIA is not briefed on every little iota of everything that goes on within the CIA. He's got 3 or 4 directorates, and there's thousands of people working in those directorates, lots of people. And he's got his own executive director of the CIA, who's a civilian career employee, not a political appointee. Then he's got his deputy directors, and the deputy directors have a weird title. I don't know if they've changed those titles in modern times, but you were the deputy director of the CIA for intelligence, for science and technology, for operations, for logistics, that kind of thing. And so he's getting briefed by those guys, but those guys aren't going to tell him every little bit of thing. It's called plausible deniability. If the clandestine service, which is in the Directorate of Operations, is undertaking some covert clandestine operations in foreign soil that the local foreign government is not aware of, they don't want to brief it up to the CIA director necessarily. They do have to get approval. The approvals will probably go up through his chain of command, but he isn't going to know all the details. I mean, it's not like he's going to butt in and tell his deputy directors, I want to know everything you are doing. They get a general management level. Okay, here's what we're doing in general. Here's how much we're spending. Here's what we would like Congress to fund us for next year. Here's the political risk we have. Here's the international political risk we have. That kind of thing. That's the level the CIA director operates at. And sure, the CIA director can get briefed on specifics, but that only is, again, like what Bush was told by his
we got the point on
there's
that.
a threshold that has to be reached beyond which they then begin to tell the director specific information.
So, Eric, I want to go back to the Holloman event, which, for our purposes, I'm going to say is alleged. Just for the benefit of someone listening, and I'm going to mention one thing, and you and I don't need to go into it here, but I'll mention that several people we know had crossed paths with the film that the Air Force had of this, that they had offered to the producers of the documentary that you mentioned. The story of that documentary was that they were the producers, one of whom, Bob Emeninger, was the founder of Gray Advertising, which was a major century advertising firm that actually did contract work with the Central Intelligence Agency. Some people from the Air Force approached him and a colleague and said, "Look, UFOs are real. We've even had a contact event. We want to share footage from that event with you and have you make a documentary about it."
That was one of the reasons for the documentary, was to have current or retired government officials at high level talk about this, as well as scientists, and talk about the subject on the narrative that Emeninger and Sandler developed for the documentary. And for your listeners who may not know, this documentary project and the companion book were sponsored by the Department of Defense and the MacArthur Foundation. Okay, that's how serious this was. The football quarterback the quarterback for this football, metaphorically speaking, was retired Air Force Colonel Bill Coleman, who was a bomber pilot in World War II in South Korea. He himself had a bomber crew undergoing a cross-country flight training, and they got chased by a UFO over several miles in the southeast, I think, of the United States. So he's had his own close encounter, and I mean, this was a close encounter. And so now he's retired, and he's working in the Pentagon Communications Office, which is also the Public Relations Office. They often change names. So he's now carrying this football for this documentary. And he was told that the Holloman landing film was going to be made available to Emeninger to include into the production of the documentary. And so they had to build the narrative to set the stage and the scene for what it is the viewer was going to see when they get to see the Holloman landing film. And so the same thing with Corso being pulled out of the Ford Rumsfeld hearing suddenly, as soon as the White House learned about it. The same thing happened with that film. So the film was going to be made available. It was going to be incorporated into the documentary, and it was going to be incorporated as a factual chapter of events that took place in the companion book. And then at the last minute, somebody got to Coleman and that public relations office, and they pulled that film. They pulled the film, and so Emeninger was left holding the bag, and at the last minute had to turn it around to save it because production was already in progress, and they would have to change where that film was inserted into the production line and redo it as a scenario in order to keep the sequence straight. The sequence for the start of the documentary to the middle to the end. So to keep it straight, they had to invent a scenario of, here's a hypothetical human contact, U.S. government contact with an alien race, alien civilization, a UFO. And they would use the word ET usually, because that's what UFOs were thought to be back then. That's how they presented it. That's how it landed in the actual documentary on television. And in the companion book, that was the same thing. They had a psychological warfare expert from a university write that chapter. And that's how he presented it. He's looking at the consequences to the human psyche, our social structure, cultural structure, religious
what
structure
would happen
from such a scenario.
Yes. Okay. So, we can't go into it, but, we know you and I both know other people. There's some of the public figures who the film was dangled in front of, and also someone who attempted to see the film, a CIA official, and at the last minute he was unable to see the film. So
That's right.
the film is this kind of almost a legend. It's almost apocryphal, and yet here you had a president saying that the film was real and he wanted to see it. Now, I'm just saying all that so that people have some context. What I want to ask you about is, if you have learned anything over the years, provided that this event took place, what the conversation was between the alleged non-human intelligence and the CIA and Air Force officials alleged to have had participated in the contact event. Because when this is recounted, this story by intelligence people, or contractors like yourself who have had it confirmed to them, no one seems to know what happens after the landing and after the moment of contact.
Yeah, it's because you have to assume that a report was written. And that's an assumption. We don't know. So either it was kept classified by not writing, not classified. The word is either it was kept off the table by not writing a report and classifying it, or there was a report, it was classified, but it's one of the most deeply held secrets. And it's just like that's one of the two things I had trouble getting into. The second one was getting access to the recovered alien bodies, and today we have different nomenclature than what us older generation guys from the 60s through.
Here, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I'm going to interrupt you. No, let me interrupt you, Eric. You tried to get access to information on recovered bodies of non-human intelligence beings. That's what you're saying as part of your work with the OSAP.
Yes. Also, getting access to that Holloman landing film and the surrounding records, if any, that accompanied it. And it's just too difficult. It's just one part of this whole thing, and that's just as deep and dark as the crash retrieval, almost darker. And it was a very difficult, impenetrable wall, with the exception that I had a president tell me about it, and I had a couple of program managers, actually one field security officer, executive administrative assistant to a program manager, and a senior VP in industry who knew about it on an official basis. And then and then I think you had some minor mention of something similar by Corso. So I've got TRW, I've got Lockheed, and I've got senior VPs, and I've got an executive administrator, F/field security officer, and I've got a U.S. president. And the Holloman landing film was being sponsored the sponsor of that to transfer it to Bill Coleman's control was Rear Admiral Edward A. Burkhalter, who was in naval intelligence, but later in the Carter administration landed at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he stayed there until sometime when he got transferred out of that during the first Reagan administration. And Burkhalter was on the staff of the DIA director at the time, but he was also a directorate head. So he was the head of the Directorate of Human Intelligence Collection Management. It's a long title at the DIA. And as a matter of fact, the longtime executive director of AFIO, Roy Jonkers, was his chief of staff. And Roy was a colonel in the Air Force at the time. And when I met Roy during the incorporation or chartering of the Las Vegas AFIO chapter in 2002, that's when I got to meet him. And I knew him for almost less than 2 years because, like I said, he died in late 2003.
Okay, so you really did have personal contact with people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With people who were involved in this whole event. So
yeah, including
Eric,
a Navy admiral, Not
this is
Admiral Burkhalter, but
I
a
can't
different
do
admiral.
I can't do justice to any of this, Eric, because I've myself been told a lot about these things from colleagues of yours, and I tend to favor the view that they're true. But we can't really go into it because we've got other stuff to cover with you. So we're going to go to another break and we're going to come
Okay,
back. And I've got some other questions for you.
good.
The Soul Foundation is dedicated to advancing groundbreaking research on UAP and shaping the global conversation about the phenomena, governmental and societal disclosure, and related frontier topics like consciousness. By becoming a Soul member, you join and financially support a network of deep thinkers, scientists, and policymakers committed to these vital explorations. To join, go to thesoulfoundation.org or click the link in the description below.
Welcome back to the Soul Forum, and Eric Davis, physicist Eric Davis, is with us as our guest. And Eric, thank you again for this abundant testimony and for being so detailed in your responses. It's very useful to people. I want to now jump into another controversial matter, which you may or may not be able to speak about, which is that I think you might have had contact not with another president, but with the member of with a cabinet member of another presidential administration.
Oh gosh, I'm at a loss on that.
In which you
one.
might have heard some
I'll
things
need a little
about
bit more detail to try to pull
that
one
president's
out.
briefing.
I think I'm wondering, are you talking about the Carter administration? Yeah, that there was the director of the staff personnel in the White House, or I guess they call it the White House personnel or White House staff personnel director. Yeah, White House staff personnel director. And he later became, he was assistant to the president, and I think he later on became chief of staff. And before that, though, he was the special trade representative to the United Nations, I think. And that individual was in the, reporting to President Jimmy Carter. And he had special knowledge of a briefing that Carter received in June of 1977. It was an economic meeting or economic related topic at this meeting in the Oval Office, but they embedded a classified briefing into that meeting. And so the briefing that came about was on the topic of the U.S.'s or the U.S. government's contact with UAP, NHIs, aliens for all intents and purposes, and the consequences thereof. And it was a short, 4 pages, I think, briefing document. And I don't remember I don't know actually what the context that led to that briefing was, but it was embedded in the schedule. So, so the context is that Carter got a briefing document of which everybody in the Oval Office who's attending this briefing gets a copy to read during the oral briefing given by whoever the briefer was. And then when they're done, they are done with business with the president in the Oval Office and they have to leave. So as they're going out the door, they're giving their briefing book back to the agency staff who handed out the briefing books. So those copies are destroyed. And only one copy of that briefing book is kept in the president's records, and the other copy is kept in the CIA's records. And so Alonzo McDonald was the guy, and he's deceased now. Unfortunately, he was very old back in the 2010s.
But my understanding is you talked to him directly.
Say again?
My understanding is that you spoke with him directly.
Yeah, there were 2 of us, and I won't name who the other one was in our group, but he was affiliated with the OSAP. He was also affiliated with NIDS. And so he did the first original one-on-one discussions with Alonzo McDonald. And the subject of the Carter Project Aquarius briefing came up because that is such a big mythical story and the whole MJ-12 swirl during the 1980s and 1990s. We wanted to get to the bottom of that. So this other gentleman in my group, and then later, much later on myself, we had independent meetings.
Well, how in the world did you find McDonald?
Well, I didn't have to find him. The other guy found him. And
okay.
They both, the other guy is so high profile, he can talk to anybody pretty much. Because I could just say that he was a former national intelligence officer, highly decorated. And so, and a three-letter agency. So basically, he knew how to find Alonzo McDonald.
Okay.
And my understanding is they both also were members of the same Christian denomination. And I don't know if that played a role. That might have, because some of the higher level people in that denomination will get together for national meetings or something.
Yeah.
And that's my guess of what was
Okay.
going on.
So
So
in short, what did McDonald tell you
basically, the
about the
the
briefing, about the contents of the
yeah.
briefing?
Okay, so the contents of the briefing were memorized by those shocked people in in the staff who were there. Um, and they couldn't believe their ears. So basically, it's like they're being told something that's counterintuitive to what the worldview that they all grew up in. And so they're hearing for the first time that the United States government had been in contact with aliens from another world, or another place of origin, which is unknown still. If it's known, I haven't seen it. But anyway, so the a number of the individuals in the White House or in the Oval Office, they started this out. I think this started out in the National Security Office or National Security Conference Room or something, and it moves to the Oval Office. So anyway, so it's in the Oval Office, and these really puzzled individuals, after the briefing, they decide to reconvene together at a hotel in the Washington, D.C. area. And they got their notepads out. They brought legal notepads, 8 by 14s, as I was told. And they started writing down their recollection of what they read in that briefing document. As I said, it's a short 4 pages. So, and it's not filled with text from top to bottom with tables and graphs and pictures. It's just 1.5 space typing. And so they read it, and so they read it, and then so they reconvene, as I was saying, in the hotel, and they're writing out their best recollection of what they read in those briefing documents. And then they did a round robin where everybody starts passing their notepad to the guy to their right or the guy to their left, and they all go around the full circle till every single notepad has been reviewed by every single person, with every individual that reads through that notepad, making changes and corrections and whatnot. And so they did that a couple times until they converged on a version of that briefing document that they all agreed was the closest possible what they all collectively recalled. And that became the notorious Project Aquarius briefing document, which um, a gentleman codenamed Falcon from the Defense Intelligence Agency had passed on to UFO investigators Bill Moore and Jamie Chandra. And it was really Bill Moore who was in a motel. He had like 15 minutes or something to read through this. This was the actual facsimile. So that's what I call the memory convergence of the notepads. One final notepad that somebody said, okay, so let's take all the different notepads, and we'll take all of the changes and converge it onto a single final notepad, do one more round robin until we all agree on that final facsimile of the briefing document. Okay, so this thing got
Just so
hang on,
everybody
hang on.
just so everybody understands, this is what McDonald told
Told me.
you and
So
the other
this told me,
investigator.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so more or less corroborated by um, retired Air Force Colonel Roy Jonkers, who I shared this with,
Okay.
and later on. So anyway, no, it wasn't Roy Jonkers. Sorry, he was already deceased. It was somebody else, and I can't think of the name right now. It escapes me. Somebody else who had government service in a 3-letter agency who I shared it with, who was familiar with it, who was familiar with the whole event. Um, so basically, they have a final document. One of them typed it up on a thermal printer. That's the old. This is where they get away from the teletype computer terminals. Now they're going to an electric thermal print terminal where you have the paper on sprockets get fed up, and you got a head that goes back and forth, and it'll burn the letters into the paper. And so this is how it's printed up, and then so it's photographed, and then no, I don't think it was. I think that actual typewritten document was then transmitted to Bill Moore in a motel, and he was given like 15 minutes to read the thing while the delivery guy, had left him alone. So
Sure,
Bill Moore,
but let's go back to Alonzo McDonald and what he told you about the briefing and the document. I mean, what was communicated in the briefing to the
say
shop
again,
staff?
repeat the question again.
What was communicated in the briefing, according to McDonald, to the shocked staff? I mean, the White House.
Oh my gosh, I
cabinet
haven't
officials
read
and
this in
staff.
so. Yeah, I didn't memorize it.
Okay.
It's, as I've already summarized it for you. It's
Okay.
the existence of alien craft, UFOs. They have visited the Earth, and they have had contact with the government, and the consequences of that in 4 succinct pages. So it's like an intelligence estimate type document. So, gosh, I haven't read that for so long. I didn't even memorize it.
Okay,
Really.
well that's fine. What did
But that's
McDonald
the gist of
say?
it.
What did McDonald say was the reaction of Carter to this?
Well, Carter's reaction was after the briefing was over and everybody had left. I understood that he put his head down like this, which is how he prays at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. So he always, when he prays, he puts his head down like this, and he puts his hands on top of his head, and he prayed. That was his reaction to the briefing, is he prayed about it. What did he pray about? McDonald didn't say. I didn't get from the other gentleman I work with or collaborate with if he had asked McDonald what he was praying about. But he prayed, and that's how he prayed. That's how Carter was known to pray at his desk. So he just prayed about it. But I think that might have been private. I don't know that anybody had asked the president that, and that he responded. I think that was just left alone. So anyway, back to Bill Moore. So Bill Moore basically.
Well, I want to skip, if you don't mind, because we don't have a lot of time. I want to skip Bill Moore. That's for the benefit of the listeners, people listening. This is a UFO researcher who was leaked this facsimile document.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was a matter of controversy for years. Because,
oh yeah, photographed. Yeah. It was he photographed it. He photographed it with the quarter on the left lower corner to show you the scale of the document by comparing it to the size of the quarter.
Sure, but let's
that was it. That's where we have to leave it, because all Bill Moore did was present at the MUFON symposia and MUFON meetings about that document.
So Eric, I want to then just ask you a kind of simple question as sort of tie all this together. What was Project Aquarius? I thought that was a fiction.
That was a Majestic 12. That was a Majestic 12 project.
Okay, so and what was Majestic 12? That
was a compartment within. It was a Wavedentic Knowledge Special Actions Program compartment within the CIA, and it was one of several. It was one of. It's just not Majestic 12 or MJ 12 all alone. It's Majestic 1, Majestic 2, Majestic 3, all the way up to 12, and
you know that for a fact.
Yes, I know that because the other gentleman who interviewed Alonzo McDonald was aware of it.
Okay.
As in the course of his employment at the same agency.
Okay. And the different Majestic projects, according to this testimony, didn't all have to do with...
No. Majestic 12 was just crash retrievals and alien contact related topics. Yeah.
Okay.
It was just focused on that one umbrella of topics.
Okay. And then within that there were smaller projects like Aquarius.
Yes, those would be called subcompartments.
Okay, that wasn't a synonym for MJ12 Aquarius.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, understood. So for a fact that that there was a compartment called MJ12.
Yeah, Dave Grusch validated that during his investigation, which went into his whistleblower complaint to the IGIC.
Okay. But you knew this beforehand yourself, correct?
I knew it before. Well, he got that from me. So, I mean, I'm the one that briefed him and his former boss, his government boss. And he got all the facts and figures from me based on my work at NIDS, AFRL, and working for Hal Putoff on the OSAP subcontract that we had to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies.
Well, okay, let's go into this a bit because one of the reasons I think it's important that people hear from you is you briefed many people in the last, I'd say, since 2017 or 2018.
19.
Yeah, okay, since
2019.
2019, you briefed staff in the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senate Armed Services Committee, and you
Correct.
also briefed in an official capacity and at request, I believe, David Grusch and another individual.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. So one thing I want to go into is that we've had key staff members of the Senate hear from you about this history of U.S. government engagement with UAP, and they've heard a lot of things that you've shared today. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. How did that come about?
Okay, you're going to have to ask that question again because I didn't capture it in my mind. Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, I'm asking, how did it come about? How was it arranged for you to go in and brief staff in the Senate Intelligence Committee or other committees?
Oh, that was Jay Stratton. Jay Stratton arranged for me to brief the Senate Armed Services Committee staff plus one guest from industry, because that guest originally worked for the Department of the Air Force and was their Special Access Program director. And then over the course of his career, he moved up to become the Special Access Program director for the Pentagon, for the Department of Defense as a whole. Okay, so I briefed those individuals at a SCIF in the Pentagon, and it was on the 5th floor. And then that was in October. That was on October 21st, 2019, and on October 20, if you're giving me a minute, 22nd of 2019, Chris Mellon and Kirk McConnell arranged for me to brief the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence staffers. And that was done in their office suite, in a controlled access room in their office suite in the Hart Senate office building. So members of the staff of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence made a visit to Huntsville, Alabama on business for whatever Senate business or Senate Intelligence Committee business they had. And it just so happens that they're visiting a defense contractor, and the senior VP of that, there's two senior VPs, and both of them actually know who I am and what I have been doing in this area. And so I think it was just arranged as a matter of opportunity that because I was living in Huntsville, Alabama at the time, to work on NASA's Space Nuclear Propulsion Program, that they get an opportunity to meet with me at this defense company's site in Huntsville, in their controlled access room. And so that was the second time I briefed staff from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, but this was a different group of staffers compared to the group of staffers I briefed in October of 2019. And this took place in June of 2021.
Okay, understood. And so did you subsequently ever do a briefing in the Senate itself for senators?
No, I have met with two senators, but that's all I'm going to say about that. And that was not a briefing. It was more of like just an informal question answer thing.
Okay.
And I have given a very short classified briefing to Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna's subcommittee in the House which is of the House Oversight Committee on secrecy, government secrecy, transparency, and I believe she and two or all three of the other members on her committee are members of the UAP caucus, if I'm not mistaken. So I met with them under sponsorship from the Disclosure Foundation on May 15th, and I went into their SCIF to give them a classified briefing, as much as I could give them within the limited amount of time that they have, because I wasn't alone. I was with two other individuals who also was providing classified information to Congresswoman Luna and the other two congressmen that were there.
Okay. I suspect that in order to really do justice to the depth of information you're presenting in testimony and the history of your work on this, we may have to do a follow-up interview at some point if you have time. But because for now, I want to kind of bring us to near the end by asking you, why do you do this? Why have you put yourself out on a limb to provide briefings to congressional staff, to other
Senate staff,
other people in the intelligence community,
right?
Because you have a complex relationship to this stuff. You are somebody who's done defense, Department of Defense and intelligence community contract work as a physicist and as a UAP researcher. So you are concerned with U.S. national security, but at the same time, it's very obvious that you have a problem with this level of secrecy and what's going on with it.
I do. I don't have a problem with keeping aspects of the UAP or the crash retrieval technology, reverse engineering work of recovered UAPs. I don't have a problem with keeping that a secret, because that can go to the heart of making a major technological discovery that could give us a leap over our foreign adversaries, to where we lose parity. Oh, I should say otherwise, where our adversaries lose parity with us because we've made a discovery on the basis of our possession of this exotic non-human technology. And so that needs to be protected. We got to protect the national security. So some aspects and elements of that type of information, all being technological, needs to be protected still. But the existence of the fact that they exist, or that's happening, and that we had government contact, or there has been government contact with NHIs, should not be kept a secret. It should be known to the public. The public should not be left blind, like the public was left blind by a number of nefarious U.S. military, U.S. military and CIA operations and projects that took place involving unwitting American civilians during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, until it all came to a head during the church committee hearings in the 1970s. And this type of thing, the American public needs to know that there's something else out there. It's non-human, it's non-Earth indigenous species. It's a life form, an intelligence of some kind that comes from another environment, not necessarily evolved on Earth, as far as I can tell. And I think we need to know about it. We need to be aware. We need to be informed, because it's interacting with the human race, and it has been interacting with the human race as far back as at least the 1500-year period that Bully and Albach's book Wonders in the Sky covered. People rightly go into the book of Genesis in the Bible, and look at Ezekiel's wheel as one example. And there's artwork during the medieval era as other examples. And then there's the Vatican archives, which Dr. Diana Pasulka has been given limited access to for her book, American Cosmic, and her further research on the interface between UAP and religion. And so forth. So I believe the public has a right to know this. I mean, the public already had a right to know that nuclear weapons existed. They couldn't hide that. I mean, they had a detonation at the Trinity site near Alamogordo, New Mexico in August of 45. Then we bombed 2 cities in Japan later that month. Actually, it was in July of 45. And then August of 45 was when the bombings of Japan took place. And then the Soviet Union finally took their stolen U.S. Bomb information from the Manhattan Project, and they built their bomb and finally got the detonators in the late 40s. You can't hide that. So hang on, Peter. So there are these things that you just can't hide because they're too public. They're too public facing. They're too public interacting. And they're too impactful on the public and the public psyche. Our social network, I don't mean social network as in the internet. I'm talking about the social network of humans and society and culture and everything. It's too it's too public. We have to have an explanation for it. And the government's sitting on top of information that provides some measure of that explanation, which would go a long way toward helping the average American understand what we're facing or what's been going on. And there's our people who don't even think about it. Most of them are in academia, STEM scientists, and many of them are engineers, and many of them are in the humanities profession, and some of them are medical doctors. If they haven't had a personal experience encountering this phenomenon, and they haven't had a natural interest toward this topic, they won't usually know about it. They'll just ignore it and walk away and just say, they'll laugh about it. They'll do like what Larry Krauss used to do on this topic back in the 2000s, when he was pretty prominently profiled in many news magazines and newspaper stories and things like that on the work that he did in physics. And when people bring UFO topic to him, he laughs about it. Same with Michael Shermer in Scientific American, the opinion author. What a nutcase. Anyway, they have a right to know. They don't have a right to know what this technology is, because we don't really fully understand it. So how can we tell them what it is, what we don't understand? We have it. We're trying to understand it. It's so far ahead of us. It's too difficult to comprehend right now. I'm sure that over the previous 30 years, there has been some incremental success toward understanding some aspects of it. I don't know what that is, because that wasn't what that's what I was hoping to get into through the OSAP with Hal Puthoff, Bob Bigelow, Colin Kelleher, and Jim Lukatsky, and Jay Stratton, and Lou Elizondo, and Travis Taylor, and everybody else who was working with us throughout all those years. This technology for warfare can be dual use for peaceful uses, which would benefit us, like power and transportation. And that's one key thing. Hal Puthoff and I have always had this altruistic thinking about getting a hold of that technology and seeing if it had been reverse engineered to the point of developing a new type of power source or propulsion that would revolutionize transportation and energy, especially in the United States, maybe for other countries too. But the problem is that this technology is so out there that it serves as a threat to us if our adversaries are able to reverse engineer or get a hold of whatever we accomplish with it and use it against us. And then we get back to parity again. The name of the game is to have strategic parity. Where we're so far ahead, they're going to have trouble being able to destroy the United States or win any war against us. And right now, we don't have very much parity with China. We've got some, but not enough, and not like we used to. Russia, like I said, there's nuclear parity there, but Russia's demonstrated in Ukraine that they're basically a military failure as well as an economic failure, because if they don't have an economy really to support their military, and they don't have the population of motivated people with the proper backgrounds and whatnot, and allegiance, they won't win that war. So anyway, that's why I think the American public should know about UAP. They need to know what's impacting them, because there's people out there who aren't talking about what's happened to them. There are people out there who have, and they want answers, and I think we should talk about it. The other reason why I'm willing to step out front and talk about it is because of 3 words. I have no fear. Okay? I'm willing to talk about it because I have no fear. I'd like to see counterintelligence guerrillas try to come after me about that. They certainly went after Dave Grusch. Yeah, I have no fear. I have no fear about talking about this, but I will not cross that line into the technical details of actual names, places, locations, things, objects, circumstances that are classified. I can't do that, but I could tell you the superficial level information, probably at a depth that is that doesn't go across that line, but is in depth enough that I'm allowed to talk about it in the same way that Lukatsky has been able to talk about it, and Jay Stratton has been able to talk about it in his forthcoming book. Yeah. So they've been able to talk about this stuff, and I'm talking about it for the same reason they are, because we can. And because we're not giving you the actual full Monty on the classified information part of that.
Right. Okay. So I got a last question for you. You mentioned the church committee as a moment when a number of intelligence community projects that I think were directly related to UAP became known to the public, and where there was a real reckoning about things the intelligence community had done outside the law. Do you think we need hearings like the Church Committee in the Senate in order to have a real fulsome public conversation?
Yes,
about what
definitely.
ground truth is? What do you think should be done?
I think we need to be issuing subpoenas. And I just read on a Twitter post, somebody sent me a screenshot of that. I think it was Burleson, who said subpoenas are probably going to be ineffective. So no, they're not doing subpoenas yet. I think really the subpoenas need to be done. They do. I think that would be a last step. The first step before that would be they really need to talk to the stakeholders at the classified level, the real program stakeholders. And I do understand that they're looking for the programs and they're trying to find out where they are and who has them. Oh, I've already given them that information. I told them who's got it. It's just that they're limited. Congress doesn't have unlimited power to step into the executive branch and demand information. They have to exploit their oversight authority under the Constitution to do so, but they're limited in that the executive branch doesn't necessarily have to cooperate with that oversight authority. The only way that Congress can make the executive branch cooperate is by using the power of the purse. So yeah, I think it's just necessary that the committees work as hard as they can using the constitutional powers they have available to have a friendly chat with the components of the executive branch that own the crash retrieval portfolio, as well as the data that's been collected, so they can see that data. That data can be strip charts, graphs, reports, memos, eyewitness reports, schematic diagrams, materials analysis, videos, film, spectrums, like from a hyperspectral imager or a multispectral imager or a standard laboratory spectroscopy device. So they should be able to get access to that information. And there shouldn't be so much resistance from the executive branch. But unfortunately, we've been seeing that the executive branch has been resisting. Nobody in the executive branch is coming out, going toward Congresswoman Luna's subcommittee and waving their document file and saying, here it is, I want to help. They can't. They're not supposed to. They got to get authorization from the president to do that.
Well, Eric, thank you. It's very, very enlightening. You have a quick final word?
I think the American public should go out and really contact your Senate and congressional district representatives and really complain and just put it out there and talk to the local university people. And don't stick to just the physics professors and engineering professors. Include the humanities professors, because those guys are looking at this from the philosophical, religion, social or society side of things, social science side of our life. We have a number of those people already now in a big interdisciplinary capacity, exchanging information, and that's being facilitated by the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University. You want to talk to the people that are associated with the Archives of the Impossible, who are members of that organization, of that group, of that research group, as well as the academic contributors. I don't want to use science because remember, philosophy is not a science and neither is religion. So the philosophers, religious studies people, et cetera, social studies people, political people, they contribute their thinking in academic documents that they have presented at Archive of the Impossible meetings and workshops. And so you need to reach out and look on the website for this organization and reach out to those folks and talk to them and urge them to push on and urge your congressional representatives from both houses of Congress. So we'd like to know whether there is contact. We'd like to know what you know about them, how the NHIs and their UAP craft. What have you learned? What do you know? What do you know about their performances and characteristics? Can you talk about that? That type of thing. Anything
all the
yeah,
vital questions. Yeah. Eric,
yeah.
thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
It's very illuminating. It's an honor to have you, and
thank you.
And the Soul Foundation, another academic organization, thanks you. So thanks a lot, Eric.
You're welcome. And I guess you'll be seeing me again a couple more times.